Hi, Gary. How are you?
Good. Listening to some old 70s gospel music, Christian music.
Uh-huh. How are things going over there at Ascension? You've been to a couple of gym services?
Well, yeah, I've got Ultra Guild coming up next week with the time change.
Oh, yeah.
So that keeps my foot in the one door. I miss being at Holy Trinity, but everything. I think with the new rector, Jim, things are good. It's too soon to tell how that's going to work out, but I think he's doing well.
Jim's a good guy. I think Ascension is will be blessed. So.
Yep.
All right, so we are approaching. We got 2 minutes till, which means the live stream is about to go live. Probably is live now currently, so that's code for be on your best behavior because the world is now watching. I'll remind everybody to keep yourselves muted until it comes time to talk.
Dan?
Yes, Betty?
There's no, nothing coming from the website.
Well, there's usually a delay. It doesn't happen immediately. I'll check it right now. And because it only goes live like 2 minutes prior, and then there's a delay.
Dan?
Yeah, it's live. I just checked it, so we're good.
Okay, fine.
Just letting you know. All right, we got a 1 minute to go. We'll hang out for just a little bit and wait for everyone to join us who's going to join. We're all Episcopalians, so that means everyone will start about 30 seconds or 1 minute after the start time. That's when everyone will show up. So, and folks may, as they learn how the live stream option works, they may just simply watch it for the live stream and not log into Zoom to participate with the questions because they just might be easier to watch it on the live stream. So we'll give it about another minute and then we'll get rolling. Thank you, everyone who has logged on. Appreciate it. Betty, can you keep yourself muted unless you have a question?
I think, am I muted?
No, we can hear you.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Well, it is currently 6:31. We're going to go ahead and get rolling so we can stay on time tonight. We should be live streaming at this point. I will quickly bring up what I talked about on Sunday during our announcements is despite the learning curve, as we discovered last week, there's a couple of things that I will get better at as I'm doing this with screen sharing and things like that using Zoom. I'm quite proud of the offering that we're being able to put forth. You know, it's doing a Zoom meeting is nothing new. I think in the pandemic, many of us have gotten used to how Zoom works, whether it's professionally or personally, or just families talking to one another, or church meetings like we use it for. And then streaming a Zoom meeting, say to Facebook, is also nothing new. I have a lot of colleagues that will stream exactly very similar to what we're doing right here. They will stream it to Facebook or YouTube, so you know, the other people can follow it and watch along. But we're doing something a little different. It's called multi-streaming, and that's what our Boxcast platform allows us to do. And we can we can multi-stream a Zoom meeting to multiple locations. It's like the next step in the technological evolution of Holy Trinity, where we're having a live meeting through Zoom, and then we're sending it out to multiple platforms. This is going to Facebook, this is going to YouTube, this is going to our website, and this is going to Boxcast. So if you have our Boxcast channel, or you have the Boxcast app on your television or computer or things like that, or tablet, all of those things are watching this live all at the same time, which is a neat thing that we're attempting to do and try out for this teaching series. So this will also pave the way, that I think, to other newer things that we'll be able to do eventually and try out. So this is a test, and we're still learning. Bear with me, but I think this is all good for where we're headed for the future. Before we dive into tonight's teaching, I want to do something that I totally forgot to do at the last meeting, because I was so hung up with making sure the live stream was going to work and all the technological components were working correctly. I totally forgot to open with prayer. And we just bounced right over that and moved right into the teaching. And so that was my fault. I was called out on it after the fact. And so I will, I intend to fix that problem. So before we move on with the teaching, let us open with a quick word of prayer. So let us pray. Gracious Heavenly Father, we just give thanks for this. We give thanks for this time together, Lord, that we have the blessing of technology, that we can share this teaching with so many people. We just ask that you bless our time together, bless the conversations that we'll have. And Lord, may your Spirit fall upon each and every one of us as we learn and grow, as we experience the sights in the Holy Land, and how these ancient times and these ancient sites can have an influence on our lives in the here and now and today. All these things we ask in your name, we pray. Amen. Okay. Well, let us dive right in. Last week, we had a couple of technological little oopses towards the end there. But rest assured, we're just going to keep rolling. When I was streamlining the PowerPoint today, I was shocked at how much I was having to cut out, and a lot of other sites that I'm having to cut out in order to fit everything into this little 6-week series. So I won't have the opportunity to go back and recap some of the things that got messed up last week. We're just going to trek forward. I do want everyone to know that we will eventually do the full teaching at Holy Trinity at some point in the future. I just don't know when. But you will get to partake in the complete training, or teaching series, which will eventually come at a future date. So if you missed something, or something was confusing at some point, or we're not touching a subject enough, don't worry, we will revisit this and go through the entire teaching in the future. So without further ado, let me do the screen share and bring up the pilgrimage and start sharing. And also, I learned how to, can everyone see the pointer? Is the pointer moving around? Yeah, so a quick little setting change, and I'm able to have the pointer up on the screen, which would help out with some of the maps and things like that. So here we go. So here's our map of Israel again. And when we began our pilgrimage, we flew into an area called Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv is one of the large cities, modern cities in Israel. It's where the big international airport is located. And even though Tel Aviv did not exist at all during the time of Jesus, by the way, I just want to go over a quick facts about Tel Aviv, because if you do travel to Israel and you do travel to the Holy Land, this is where you will fly into. So Tel Aviv, it is the second most populous city in Israel, behind Jerusalem. It was founded in 1909, so it's a relatively new city, historically speaking. And it was a housing estate. It was like a housing project originally outside the ancient port of the city of Jaffa. And Jaffa is noted in scripture. It's a global city. It's ranked 25th on the Global Financial Centers Index. Economic and technological center of the country. It is the largest economy per capita in the whole Middle East. So it is now a big booming city. It's also known as the party capital of the Middle East, with its lively nightlife and 24-hour culture. Kind of sort of think of it like a New York City, mixed with a little bit of maybe Las Vegas. And there you go. You kind of get Tel Aviv. 2.5 million international visitors annually. And a significant amount of the visitors are doing pilgrimages, whether they are Jewish, Christian, or Muslim. They fly into this airport to do pilgrimages, specifically to Jerusalem. So this is a major international airport. It's also where you go in and out of the security for Jerusalem or Israel, which is its own fun process. So here we are again. I'm going to zoom in on where Tel Aviv is, and it's up here, and we followed this blue line. You should see a blue line. So you see the pointer up here in Tel Aviv, and we traveled the blue line all the way down into the Negev. I'm going to back up one slide. Remember, the southern part of Israel, we called it the Negev, which means desert. The whole southern kind of third of the country is nothing but desert. And we're going to drive from Tel Aviv to into the Negev, but just the little northern part. We didn't go deep into the desert. Once again, we got the little blue line. This is our route that we took on our bus when we left the airport. And we go to an area called Kfar Hanokim, which is just an area of the northern Negev. As you can see, through the bus drive, that's about an hour and 34 minutes. So not a terrible amount of time to go from Tel Aviv down to the desert. And this is where we would end up right here. This is a picture that I took from the bus, simply just looking out at the desert as we were driving along. This is the terrain that you pretty much saw once we got outside of the city and we got more towards the south and entered the kind of northern Negev. This is what it looked like pretty much everywhere. And I just happened to snap this shot right here, right before we went around a mountain or kind of like a gigantic hill that was going to cover it up. What you see here, and I'll circle it with the my pointer, this is where we're headed. So essentially, it's an oasis. You know, we think of oasis as something that has water and life in the middle of a desert. Now, I don't know for certain if this is a natural oasis. This may be a little bit more of a touristy oasis because they know, pilgrims come from all over the world and they want to experience different parts of the Holy Land. And so I couldn't tell you officially if this is a true oasis or if it's a man-made oasis, but it is, trust me, out in the middle of nowhere. And this is where we're headed. What it was called the Bedouin Camping Experience at Kfar Hanokim. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to start our pilgrimage with what's called a Bedouin Camping Experience. Now, you may be asking yourself, what is a Bedouin? All right, well, I'm going to tell you. A Bedouin, it is a nomadic Arab of the Arabian, Syrian, or Northern African deserts. So they're nomads. Bedouins are nomads that live in the desert and they survive in the desert. They stay away from city dwelling. They stay away from the populous areas. They simply live in the desert in these little groups. And this would have been much more of a thing in the history of the land, but there are still Bedouins to this day that live out in the desert, and they survive out in the desert, and they trade, they collect things to sell at markets when they come to town and get items that they need. This is how they live. The English word Bedouin comes from an Arabic word, Badawi, which means desert dweller. So there is your Bedouin definition. Traditionally, Bedouins are divided into tribes or clans and share a common culture, which is of herding of camels, goats, and a vast majority of them currently are Muslim. All right. The modern US equivalent, so what would we kind of equate Bedouins to, would be some of our Native American tribes that live in Native American protected lands and kind of off the grid. They might be an example of a Bedouin. Another example of a Bedouin might be the Amish. You know, they do live in towns or right outside of towns, but they've kind of resisted modernity and modern civilization and things like that. So, so that would be kind of like maybe in a way to understand what a Bedouin is in our current context. Hold on one second. And this is what we arrived to see. It had gotten dark. Right about the time we arrived, the sun was going down. We got checked into our tents, which I'll show you the tents in just a minute. And then we go to dinner. And let me tell you what, the food over there is so good. I fell in love with, Middle Eastern and Mediterranean food when I went out to this place. And we arrived at this just banquet where you show up, you grab your seats, and everything is kind of buffet style, where you just walk around and grab the various things that you'd like to eat, sit down and have your fellowship time with your group. So this would have been our very first meal together on the pilgrimage. Not bad for a camping trip when this is what you sit down to at your table. This was our tent. We called it glamping, glamorous camping, where we are out in the desert, but we're not in pop-up tents or anything like that. We're in these nice tents. This is a picture of the tent where we stayed, and it was very comfortable, very very much like the deserts. If you've ever been out west over here in the United States, where the days are hot but the nights are cold. It was exactly the same kind of a temperature. Your days got into the mid to upper 90s, sometimes 100, but it was a bit of a dry heat. And then at night, it could get down into the 60s and 50s in the evening. So we get kind of chilly in the evening. But this is where we would stay during our glamping experience. I was walking around early the next morning, and I just decided to take pictures of the kind of campus where we were staying to get a sense of the lay of the ground. You see the palm trees in the back. You can probably tell by the palm trees, if you look at them, what's going on this particular day. It's windy. It's very, very windy. In fact, the wind blows a lot, pretty much chronically out there. So you can see how the palm trees are kind of all blowing one direction. When you got up above the kind of camping level buildings, it got quite windy. So just a quick note about how the pilgrimage went about. We had 3 layers of the pilgrimage. We had the academic layer, we had the local layer, and we had the spiritual layer. The academic layer was led by a British scholar named Dr. Peter Walker. He's a New Testament scholar, and he is also a scholar on the Holy Land itself. He's written books and a video series on the Holy Land and all the sites. So he was one of our 3 guides, which is an incredible thing to have when you have a lot of deep questions to ask about scripture, the historical documents, and the sites themselves. He was a wealth of knowledge. Then you had our local, which I forgot, I didn't get his last name, but his first name was Faraj. And it was, he joked and he said, it's like garage where you put your car, but with an F. His name was Faraj. And he was our local guide. He was our tour guide leader from the tour company that we had. He was a Christian Palestinian. And I think that question came up last week about the Palestinians. He was a Christian Palestinian, and he was, I believe, Lutheran, believe it or not. And he brought with it all of the local understanding of all of the sites, and could also give us a lot of interesting insight on like the current dynamics between Israelis and Palestinians and things like that. So that was, his name was Faraj. And in our spiritual guide, this is a priest in the Anglican Diocese of South Carolina. His name was Father Mike Lumpkin. Wonderful guy, and he led all the spiritual retreats. So every time we come to a site, he had a spiritual lens where he would lead us through reflections and things like that. So that was kind of how this pilgrimage went about. That's Dr. Peter Walker. Not the best picture of him, unfortunately, but that was the only photo I think I have of him of the entire trip. But outside of kind of getting a picture off the internet of him from his website, I just put this one up. This is Faraj, our Palestinian guide. This was him talking to us at Masada, and wonderful, wonderful gentleman. He was just a riot, and he had a wealth of knowledge. I have a picture of Mike Lumpkin a little later in the slideshow. I talked about last time about the difference between a pilgrimage and a tour. And we kind of went through these on day one. We were trying to differentiate from why we were there on this pilgrimage. And I found this particular slide, this info is interesting. So we compare tourist versus pilgrim. A tourist changes the environment around them. What that means is the tourist comes and spends money and pumps back into what they are, into where they go, right? Just like people come to Florida and they pay their money and they come and they use our resources here because they're getting the benefit. They're changing our environment, you know, by pumping their resources into us. A pilgrim, the environment changes them. When you're on a pilgrimage, your surroundings, it's designed to change you. You don't change the environment changes you on a pilgrimage. Tourists want to get away from life's issues. I don't want to deal with job. I don't want to deal with bills. I don't want to deal with stress. So I go on a vacation to get away from all that. Pilgrims, you confront life's toughest questions. You go to sometimes face your demons. You go to sometimes face the big challenges in life. You go to get answers and do work to learn more about yourself and the world around you. A tourist looking for good service. You know, if I go to a hotel and I am not getting good service on my vacation, I am upset. I can't believe this rental car doesn't have automatic windows. I want the best. I'm on vacation, you know, or I want room service 24/7. You know, we're looking for good service. We're on a vacation. Pilgrim, willing to sacrifice your own comforts for the greater learning. What am I going to have to give up to have an experience? What am I going to have to shed myself of to be transformed by the environment around me? I'm not looking for good service. I'm not looking for a vacation thing. I'm looking for the tough road so that that road will form and shape me. And finally, a tourist, problems and difficulties spoil the experience. I think we've all been on vacations where things didn't go right, and then all of a sudden the vacation is ruined. On a pilgrimage, problems and difficulties enhance the experience, where you are challenged, and the difficulties are supposed to push you. And that then makes the experience better because you're going through this from a completely different point of view. The difference between being a tourist and a pilgrimage. This is a pilgrimage, and that's why we're doing what we're doing. But then, why start in the desert? You've probably been asking yourself, well, when are we going to get to the sites about Jesus? Why all this talk about this Bedouin camping experience? What's the point? Well, and why would you go to something like this, out in the middle of nowhere? This is an aerial shot of our Bedouin camp. You know, why head down south and go into this area and then not go straight to Bethlehem, or not go straight to the Jordan, or not go straight to Galilee or Jerusalem, or so on? You know, as a pilgrimage, we have to kind of shed off the real world. Sometimes you just need the life cleanse before you can enter the pilgrimage. If you've ever been on like a 3-day weekend kind of a program, like Cursillo, Walk to Emmaus, Trace Diaz, things like that, it takes you almost a full 24 hours to get over the fact that you're not allowed to have your cell phone anymore. You know, you got to unplug from the other world in order to embrace what's in front of you. And that was intentional. We went down to this desert, down to this camping experience. We spent 2 days down there before we even started our actual pilgrimage to kind of go through a whole series of spiritual reflections. And there's no better place to do that than the desert. Why? Because there's nothing there. There's absolutely nothing there. It's just you, a bunch of dirt, and God. And that's when you can begin to kind of let go of all your obligations, let go of the things that may be bugging you from back home and things like that. And then you can really immerse yourself in the experience. And so that's what we did. We spent 2 days in the desert. And what we would do is we would go out, we would have these reflections, and then we were basically instructed, go for a walk all by yourself in the desert. Go in any direction, just don't go with someone else. And you just start walking, and you just start meditating, talking to God, thinking about whatever it was we had just had a reflection on. And that's what we did. We went out, and I'll be darned. When I sometimes think about the entire pilgrimage that I went on, I still think to this day, some of the coolest moments was this beginning out in the desert with nothing. There's something about this place, and there's something about being there and being in this land that speaks to you in a way that's almost undescribable. And you can just be out there and see rocks and dirt, and nothing but wind, and nothing like what you see and off into the horizon in this picture. But yet it is amazingly fulfilling to just be present on that ground. And that's what I found. We have what I can't go into today are a lot of the reflections that we did because we simply don't have time. This is kind of the stuff I had to cut, but which we'll do in the larger teaching. I just wanted to share a couple of pictures of our experience. And you can just kind of get a lay of the land of what we were looking at when, and these are pictures that I took when I was just out on some of my walks all by myself out in the desert. It's interesting, if you look in the foreground, you see how rocky it actually is. See all the rocks? The whole desert is like this. Off into the distance, it all looks like what you see in the foreground there. And it's just me walking. I just walked straight until I got halfway through our time and then turn around and walk back. But had some really neat spiritual experiences as I'm walking around the desert. Now, one of the things we did get to do that was not so spiritual, but was a fun thing to do. I mean, you can't go to this area and not ride a camel, right? And so part of the Bedouin experience was you could ride camels. And so we got up one morning, I think our second morning we got there, we got up early and we all piled into a tent and we got to ride camels. And so there you go. There's some of the camels and we each got on 2 by 2. This is me taking a picture from my camel. So I was in the front of this particular camel. My buddy John was behind me, and there we go. I had to laugh, and the reason why I took this particular picture is only because we just look so touristy on day one. Look at this. You know, if you look way down here to the far left, this gentleman here leading this camel, this would have been the normal attire for most of the people who live in the area. Kind of dark colored long pants, boots, dark colored shirts, and a hat. And then look at all the Americans over here. Bright colored shirts, some people wearing slacks, pressed pants, and it's like definitely on day one, we just looked like a big band of tourists riding a bunch of camels. And as I was on my camel looking out at all this, I couldn't resist but take a picture because it did look pretty funny. But you know, but most of us live in Florida, so I think we're used to being on the other end of the stick when you can spot the tourist a mile away. You know what I mean? So got a few more desert pictures of one of my other walks that I went out on. Again, this was a 2-day experience out in the desert where we were just spending time with God, doing spiritual reflection and kind of shedding off the real world so we can enter into the pilgrimage. It's a picture that my buddy John took of me right before we left. We're about to get on the bus and start heading out on our actual pilgrimage. Now, we're going to move into Bethlehem. And just so you know, this is where we'll depart from the normal order of the teaching. I decided for the teaching to order everything in more or less the biblical narrative order of Jesus's life. But that is not the order in which we did the pilgrimage, because if you did that, you would be zigzagging all over the Holy Land, and that's just not feasible. So the actual pilgrimage and the actual teaching that I do does do the pilgrimage chronology of all the sites we saw in order. But for this teaching, I've kind of done it out of order. And where else would we start but the birthplace of Jesus, and go to Bethlehem itself and see the site where many believe where Jesus was born. And so that's where we'll start, you know, in engaging in the sites of the Holy Land that involve Jesus's life. So here's our map of Israel again. And almost right here in the middle, just so we can orient ourselves, if you see my cursor, I'm circling a red square. This is Jerusalem. Jerusalem is kind of right in the middle, north, south, east, west. You can always kind of find Jerusalem with Israel because you really just look right to the center, and that's where you find it. We're going to zoom in, and the blue dot is Bethlehem. So as you can see, Bethlehem is not that far from Jerusalem. It's just due south of Jerusalem. I don't know, it's like 15 miles or something like that. Maybe not even that far. And that's Bethlehem. This is where Mary and Joseph went to be registered. And while they were there, baby Jesus was born. Now I bring up Mary and Joseph for a reason. See, you remember, Mary and Joseph lived in a town called Nazareth. That is Jesus's hometown. That's where Mary and Joseph lived before they went to Bethlehem, because remember, they had to go to Bethlehem to be part of the census that was going on. You had to go to your patriarchal hometown, and for Joseph, it was Bethlehem because that was the city of David, and that's where he was going to be registered. And then they would go back home to Nazareth, and that Nazareth is where Jesus grew up. Well, where's Nazareth? All right, got to zoom way out. Nazareth is way up here at the top, and this blue dot, this is Nazareth. And they would travel all the way down here on a donkey, Mary being pregnant, to Bethlehem for this census. Now, in the modern time, you can drive it in like an hour and a half. You do have to go through checkpoints and stuff like that because you're in and out of the West Bank. But I think you can drive it I think it was about an hour and a half. On a donkey, stopping, this is days of a journey to do this. And this is how far Mary and Joseph had to travel just to be a part of the census. So they go back down to Bethlehem, and many of us know the Christmas story. They go, there's no room for them in the inn. They can't find lodging. And so someone puts them up in a manger, as it is said. And then that's when baby Jesus was born in a manger. And I'll get back to the whole manger scene in just a minute when we get to the actual church. What I want to do first is go over some of the history of the site. So when you go to Bethlehem, the number one site that everyone goes to is the Church of the Holy Nativity. That is the church that has been built on top of the site where they believe Jesus was born. And this is the name of the church. So I want to go through a little bit of its history, and this would be after Jesus was born, kind of a history. But what does the church have? This is what they call the location of the Nativity Grotto, or the Nativity Cave. Now I know automatically some of you may be going, well, wait a minute, I thought he was born in a manger. And our manger scenes, if you think about it, traditionally are outdoors. They are kind of like a wooden covered structure that looks like an outdoor barn kind of a thing. And that's where our kind of modern idea of Jesus's birth takes place. And we get that from our creche scenes and things like that. But the reality is that's not where they believe Jesus was actually born. Why? Because at the time of Jesus, many mangers and where they kept their animals were in caves. There were a lot of caves that were on these little hills, and they would be carved out and used for animal storage. They would have gates at the mouth of the cave, and the animals were kept in little paddocks inside the cave. And so the understanding is that Jesus was born actually in a cave, but it was a manger where they kept animals. And this church sits atop of the location that they believe where this cave was. And I'll get to that in just a minute. But this church houses what they call the Nativity Grotto, and grotto means cave. So a little bit of the history. 135 CE. So you got to think between the time of Jesus's resurrection and ascension, the early church began to spread out. The disciples and the apostles began to spread the word of the gospel. Christianity began to flourish underground, by the way. Christianity was not an authorized faith within the Roman Empire until 313. Right now, it is not a legal faith and not illegal, so it's an underground religion that's beginning to flourish underground. But the Emperor Hadrian, the Roman Emperor Hadrian, went through multiple efforts to try to squash Christianity. And in around the year 135, he chose this specific site and built basically a palace to the Greek god Adonis. And she was the Greek god of beauty and desire. And he built a palace on this site. Now, the only reason why you would want to do that is if you're trying to cover up something that existed prior to. The understanding, the scholars that have studied this, as many of the Christian sites, you see, it wasn't legal to set up a church because Christianity wasn't legal. And so what would happen was there would often a lot of little shrines and things like that. And it was the verbal tradition. Christians would tell each other, oh, this is where it happened right here. And there would be little small shrines set up, but there were no churches on top of these sites because that was illegal. This was not a legal faith to be practicing at the time. You could be persecuted for it. So a lot of what happened between the early church, apostles and disciples, and between the year 313, when Constantine converted, a lot of what was going on was simply passed down verbally and small shrines set up in the places where they believed the big things happened in the life of Jesus. And what would often happen was emperors would come along and they would try to squash some of the big sites by setting up a pagan temple on top of the site. And that's what happened on this site. In 135, the Emperor Hadrian built a palace here to a Greek god. And the only reason why he would do that would be if this was a significant site to Christianity. So something important happened here. This is where I'm getting at with all this. And he was trying to cover it up. So he built a palace to a Greek god over top of it. Saint Jerome, and this is the guy who converted the scriptures into Latin, which is called the Vulgate. He was also an early church historian. He lived in the late 300s and early 400s. He wrote specifically that the reason why Hadrian built this temple was to try to wipe the memory of Jesus from the world. It was very intentional. He was trying to squash out. So he was trying to cover up all of the little sites that Christians were running around to, and noting the high points in Jesus's life. Jerome wrote that was specifically what Hadrian was trying to do. But eventually, Emperor Constantine comes to power, and then he and his mother, Helena, convert to Christianity. And in 313, Constantine passes what's called the Edict of Milan, and that's when he makes Christianity a legal religion in the Roman Empire. A lot of people say that's when he made it the official religion of the Roman Empire. That is not the case. That didn't happen until later, after Constantine. Constantine made it legal because he was the first Roman emperor to convert to Christianity. And then what Constantine does is he starts running around, and through interviewing and talking to people, he starts trying to locate all of the special sites in the life of Jesus. I'm spending a lot of time talking about this now because this will be a reoccurring theme when we talk about all the churches that have been set up in the Holy Land over top of sites. Constantine and his mother Helena, they ran around looking for the sites. Quite often, there were pagan temples built on top of them, and Constantine would tear them down and build a church. And so that's what happens in 327. Constantine builds a church on top of this site and claims it as this is where Jesus was born. And they built a church on top of a pagan temple, which was built on top of a cave. So what that really means is the cave doesn't exist anymore. It was destroyed. There's nothing left of the actual cave. And so when you get down in there, it's hard to see that it's actually a cave anymore. It is underground a little bit, but that's just kind of how these sites work. They had existed at one point and then built and destroyed and built and destroyed and built and destroyed over time. And so what you see now is very different than what it would have been back in the time of Jesus. In 529, the church was the Constantinian church. It was destroyed by a fire during what they call the Samaritan revolts. So it was destroyed, burnt to the ground. But then, about 35 years later, the Byzantine Emperor Justinian rebuilds the church. And he builds a new church on top of the old church. And for the most part, that is the church that still exists to this day. All right. So it makes for an interesting fact about it. The Church of the Holy Nativity is the oldest major church in the whole Holy Land. And throughout this history of wars and conflicts and all kind of craziness, this specific church has miraculously survived. And this is what they say is the longest continual place of worship in all of Christianity is this specific church. Because after Justinian built it, it has survived until this day in its relatively similar shape and form. with some exceptions. And I'm going to go over those in just a little bit. Currently, the church is co-maintained by the Greek Orthodox, the Armenian Church, and the Franciscan Order of the Roman Catholics. So you can imagine how well they get along over the management of this site. And that is common with some of the high holy sites throughout Jerusalem, is they are co-maintained by multiple groups within the Christian faith. You know, I mean, who's ever heard of fights inside the church, right? That never exists. And so, let alone major divisions of the Christian faith, they're all trying to get along in these high holy sites. So that's one of the miracles that even modern day, that they can even get along in the same building. But they do. The site's co-maintained. So here we go. Let's dive into the church itself. This is a picture of the church as I'm looking up. And you see a much more modern and polished bell tower at the top that is not original to the building. See all the stone outside. Now, look at this. When I first walked up to this thing, I was not even under the impression that I'm walking up to a church. Do you see a church here? I don't. Now, if you look closely, look at my pointer. You see the little point here, right? And at the point, there's a cross up here. You see what used to look like an old pointy top of a church. And you see this right here, this square that goes all the way down here. This is one of the Justinian church's doors. It was obviously filled in. But look at all this other exterior. What does it look like to you? You are correct. It looks like a fortress. Why? Well, because after the Justinian church, the Crusaders came along and they modified the outside. And the Crusaders made it into a fortress to protect it. And so the outer architecture was shifted by the Crusaders so that it would be almost like a fortress and get protected. It's one of the most unique looking churches in the whole Holy Land because none of them really look like this. But the inside, once you get through this facade, is the Justinian church. Now, this is going to make some of y'all laugh. Now I'm going to zoom in. You see this? Like I said, this is the original Justinian door. I mean, look how big it is, right? You see the people walking. This is the original Justinian door right here. Here's the current door. Look at that little thing. And this is Father Mike Lipkin, the guy who's our spiritual leader. This is him. He's about 6'3". He's a tall guy coming out of this little tiny door. This is called the Door of Humility. Now, they did this for a reason. During the Mameluke period, which was after the Crusaders, when they had the big door, it would have been routine for both marauders to just ride their horses right inside the church and stir up trouble and try to take things and all that kind of stuff. Also, it would have been commonplace for your big military leaders, your generals and other high officials. They would also ride their horses into churches through the big front doors. And they began to not like that practice. And so they, way back in the Mameluke period, so this would have been post-Crusader, in like around the year in 1200s, they made it tiny. They filled in the door and they put this tiny little door in because they wanted to keep livestock and horses out and people from riding their livestock into the church. But two, they thought it was very appropriate that you kneel and bow to get into the site where Jesus was born. And that's why they call it the Door of Humility, because you have to bow to get in. And that's how you get into this church. So this is the inner door. Once you go through that small door, you see the much larger wooden door, which dates back to the Crusader era. And then you walk through and see, this is Mike. Again, he's, I think, 6'3", and you see, he even still has to bow just a little bit to get inside the inner door. When you get inside, this is what you see. So this would be the nave of the church. You have all these very ornate golden hangings, ornaments, lights, candles hanging from the center nave of the church, which is the center aisle of the church. They were going through a massive renovation project. So what they were doing here, as you can see, they are restoring, as to the best of their ability, a lot of the original Justinian mosaics that are up on the walls and up on these columns. They've been graffitied, they've been painted over, they've been defamed throughout its history. They're going through and restoring all of these. And what they do is, this is original. These mosaics are original to the church. And then, but this is all that they can do. Everything else has been torn down. So what they did was they're painting it white and the gray to kind of offset what's original and then what's modern. And this is a major project that's ongoing in, and it's all over the place. So again, these are gold flake mosaics that are all over, and they depict scenes from the Gospels in the life of Jesus. This would have been the center. These two large hangings. This is kind of over the chancel space where, like, we would have the altar, kind of the front of the church, if you will. It's just me looking kind of backwards a little bit. This is the front of that would be where the kind of high altar area is. You're not allowed to go up in there, but you see all those golden impressions and icons there in the back. For the four Gospels, and then all of the icons up above, up here, that have been made, that are part of the back apse area. Just some more pictures of that front space. On each side is a chapel, all right? So you see over here where my pointer is, this is a chapel that would be on the left side, and there's a chapel on the right side. That's, again, the center. So this is the chapel that's on the right side. And you can see even here in the kind of the middle, these are icons and golden impressions that are depicting the birth of Jesus. We've got Mary and the baby Jesus in these. And this is important because this is where you enter to go down into the grotto. So on the right side chapel, you will see a set of stairs that look like this. And what you do is you go down the stairs. And so what you're going down underneath this area right here. So this area is directly above the actual grotto where they believe Jesus was born. And so on the side, you go down these steps, you go through this entryway, and this is pictures that I took. Now, this is a picture that I kind of took from the internet. It was hard to get a picture without a whole bunch of people standing in line. Because there's a line of people coming down these steps normally. But you see these steps. These are, when you go down this entry and you go in this door and you enter the steps, you come into this space. You walk down these steps, you come down in here, and this is the spot that is over and represents the grotto where they believe Jesus was born. So again, this is a picture I took off the internet, but this is a picture that I took myself. When I was standing in front of it, you have, they just like we have the liturgical colors, they have different colors of the year, and they have all these little lamp candles hanging inside. And then you have this silver 14-point star that marks the spot. X marks the spot, right? And this is the spot. And here is a high resolution picture that I got off the internet. It was hard to get a good picture in there with all the people. So this is what the 14-point star looks like. Real quick, why the 14-point star? If we were in a group setting, I could ask the question. But you got to see Matthew 1:17 to understand why there is a 14-point star. 14-point star is, it's based on Matthew 17. Matthew 1 has the big genealogy of Jesus. If you read the very first chapter of Matthew, it goes the lineage from Adam to Moses to David, King David to, Joseph, and Jesus, and so on and so on. And I just want to read it to you real quick. So all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations. And from David to his deportation to Babylon, 14 generations. And from the deportation of Babylon to the Messiah are 14 generations. So the way they have it lined out in Holy Scripture is there's 3 blocks of 14 generations that go from Abraham to David, David to Babylon, and Babylon to the Messiah. There are 3 groups of 14 generations. And so that's why there's a 14-point star. It's based on this piece of Scripture. So this is a picture that I took. There's 2 of the guys in the pilgrimage down there. That's typically what people do, is they go, they approach, you can kneel, you can touch the spot, you can touch the star, you can pray, you can have a few moments, and then you get up, and then it's someone else's turn, because there's a line, coming down the steps for people to reverence the spot. So that, again, that's Dr. Peter Walker here on the left. I took this shot, and then of course someone was kind enough to take a shot of me here. So I'm here in the gray on the left, and that's me kneeling at the site. And so what I'm going to do is we're getting close to the end of our time. I'm going to talk about a couple quick things and then tell you about a little spiritual moment. How do they know this is the site? This is one of the questions that is quite often asked. Okay, how do they know that this is the exact spot? And as I've said, like the last teaching, we don't know for sure. This is a site that early Christians visited. It was passed down to the verbal tradition, and then it was built over by the Roman emperor, and then Constantine relocated again through interviewing and word of mouth, and the fact that there was already a palace here to a Greek god, and seemed like they were trying to cover something up. So then he builds a church here. But they did find underneath the church caves. And the practice would have been, that the deepest part of the cave would have also been the warmest part of the cave and the most protected part of the cave. And so the theory is this, that if Mary was going to give birth, they wouldn't have had her towards the opening. They would have put her in the deepest part of the cave, so that it was the most protected and it was the warmest area. That's where Mary would have given birth, would have been the deepest part of the cave. And it is understood that this part is the end and the deepest part of this series of caves right here in this little area. And so it's basically a big educated guess that that since it was the deepest part of the cave and it lines up with what would have been practiced at the time, that this is the place where Jesus could have been born. And so it's been marked by the Christian church all these many years. And I will admit, this was one of the first of the big sites that I visited. And when I was there, I got hung up in my head. I kept thinking to myself, well, how do we know this is the real site? And how do we know this? And how do we know that? And I must admit, this was probably one of the sites that I wish I could return to one day, because I was in my head a bit more than I was in my heart on this particular site. And I think I missed the overall moment of the site. Again, like I said last week, is knowing the actual site the important thing, or just knowing what it represents? Is that the most important thing? And that would be something that I would kind of wrestle with the entire pilgrimage. However, one of the neat things that happened was when everybody was done in our pilgrimage, and we were basically standing around, and just before we were about to go up the stairs on the left side and exit the grotto, Mike Lupkin, our spiritual kind of priest and director on the pilgrimage, kicks off the part of the Christmas hymn, "Oh, Come Let Us Adore Him." And he just starts singing it a cappella. And before we knew it, everybody in the grotto, like beyond our group, because there was another English speaking group in there that knew the song, the whole group is singing, the chorus, "Oh, come, let us adore him." And that was a moment. I'll tell you that. Just to be in that spot, in that place, and to sing that little bit of the hymn, "Oh, come, let us adore him, Christ the Lord," pointing to one of the big Christmas songs that we all sing, being in that place right then and there. That was most definitely a spiritual moment and something that I will not forget. So that was a neat little thing that did happen in the grotto. We would exit out the other side. We would spend some more time there, and then we would go on our way. So what I'm going to do now is I'll stop my screen share and exit out of this. And I'm going to open up briefly for questions. I know I've spent most of the time talking, which is often when I get doing these teachings. But I wanted to open up for a little bit of time for questions from those who are on the Zoom group. If you have any questions for me, I'll feel free to answer if I can. If not, we'll just call it a night. But any questions from anybody? No questions? None? Oh, come on. All right. Go for it, Nancy. Oh, unmute. You're still muted. There we go. Gotcha.
The inside of the church reminded me of the mosques in Turkey.
Mm-hmm.
The big open with the arches and all of the ornaments, and then the mosaics up on the top. Of course, in the mosque, when the Muslims came in, they covered up all of the Christian symbols and put all of their symbols. And now they're restoring the Christian symbols, and it kind of gave me the feeling that that's what it looked like back in those days.
Yeah, I mean, yes, a lot of the what are now mosques in areas like Turkey, because Turkey, Istanbul is Constantinople, and Constantinople was Constantine. It's named after him. Was trying to set up a Constantinople as the kind of, Rome was the main area for the Roman Empire of the West, and he was trying to set up Constantinople as the capital of Rome of the East. And so all of those were churches, and they were Christian churches, and they went through various phases of the icon, all kinds of icons and images and the gold and just the incredibly ornate things. And then the iconoclasts came along, and they thought all that was sacrilege. We didn't need this stuff. We should be not worshiping golden depictions of Jesus, but only Jesus. And so then there was a backlash against all that. Then of course you had the in many areas where the Muslims came in, and they took the Christian churches and turned them into mosques, and they covered up a lot of the stuff. But now even in Muslim countries, the historians are starting to unravel some of that stuff simply for its historical significance, and bringing back a lot of the Christian images as well. Because believe it or not, Jesus is a figure in Islam. And so there's value to that even in Islam. And so they're beginning to recognize that. And so they're doing a lot of restorations. But you're right, they all would have been originally built during Constantine's kind of original charge to kind of set up churches everywhere. And so that's why they have similar, especially the really old ones, they feel similar because they were built in a not too different time frame from one another. As we move forward and we see other Christian sites, the churches will start looking different because the original Constantinian and the Justinian churches would have been smashed to pieces and torn down. And what you see now are churches that were built in the 16, 17, and 1800s, and they're much more modern in the grand scheme of things. And then they start looking like what we would kind of think would be traditional Roman Catholic style churches, churches from the medieval time period, the Renaissance, and things like that. So But good question, because yeah, you will notice all over the Middle East and the Mediterranean.
Before, that's the same time period.
Yep. Many of them come from a lot of the same time periods. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you very much for tonight's session. Right about an hour. Next week, we will head to the Jordan River. Then we're going to head to the Wadi Kelt, which is where they might believe Jesus went into the wilderness. And then we're going to head up to Galilee. We're just kind of following along Jesus's life, River Jordan, wilderness, and then ministry in the Galilee area. That's where we'll talk about next week, and a couple of those sites. So thank you very much, everyone. I hope we had a good evening. I will see many of y'all on Sunday morning. And until we meet again, may God's blessings be with each and every one of you. Bye-bye now.